Hello, my name is Sean Osborne, and welcome to the Black Patriots of Lexington. Lexington, Massachusetts, the birthplace of liberty, the site of the first armed conflict of the American Revolution. Lexington, the home of black residents since it was known as Cambridge Farms. Some of those black residents owned property and paid taxes. Others were enslaved or indentured. Many of them played vital roles in the founding of the United States of America. Scholars estimate that at least 50 black men responded to the Lexington Alarm and engaged the British regulars on April 19, 1775. 3 of those men were from Lexington, Prince Estabrook and cousins Eli and Silas Purdue. 2 other men are known to have fought in Lexington, Caesar Farragut and his son, John Farragut. Both served with the Natick militia. And over 2,000 black patriots from Massachusetts served between 1775 and 1783. Today, we will explore the life and times of Cate and Prince Chester, black patriots who helped to make colonial America independent by helping to produce linen as colonists were boycotting British goods in response to the Stamp Act of 1765. While Cate was not a member of the Daughters of Liberty and Prince was not a member of the Sons of Liberty, their labor was part of the resistance to taxation without representation. Our guides on this exploration of the incredible lives of Cate and Prince Chester are Margaret Micholet and Michelle Parish. Welcome, Margaret and Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank
John.
you.
So, this idea of making cloth out of plant fiber, that seems strange to me as someone who grew up thinking about loincloths and only using the sinews of animals and their skins for clothing. How long have humans been so ingenious to take plant fibers and to weave them together?
Mm-hmm. Well, the oldest example of flax that we has been carbon dated is about 35,000 years old. So the use of flax as a textile plant to make string or cordage is very, very old, Upper Paleolithic or Neolithic at least. So yeah, people have been very innovative and creative in using the natural resources around them for thousands of years.
So I'd heard that one of the ways that the Western Europeans learned to make linen out of flax was through the Romans coming into Egypt. Have you seen any of that research about the connection between Egypt and the Roman Empire?
Hundreds of thousands of years, or at least tens of thousands. So the oldest known example of flax fiber that's been dated is about 35,000 years old, from Eastern Europe, sort of Western Asia. It's the use of plants to make fibers, and specifically flax, has spread through different cultures around the world over the past, several thousand years.
So Eastern Europe, Mesopotamia, the Nile Delta, those were the centers of the ancient world that we know of that had flax and linen?
Yep, and other fibers in other parts of the world, but the flax is fairly temperate climate type of plant, so it does well in those areas.
So of all the things to bring with them, right, why would they bring flaxseed?
Right, so the Latin name for flax is Linum usatitissimum, which means the most useful, and literally every part of the plant is useful, starting with the seeds. So if you eat any kind of baked goods with flaxseed on them, for example, the seeds are useful for eating, also for pressing for oil. So flaxseed oil or linseed oil is incredibly useful as a paint ingredient, all kinds of uses for that. And fun fact, this is not historical for New England, but the linoleum is also
really?
a product made from flax and linen. So you can use the fibers and press it. So it had historical uses and still today is like a very, very valuable, useful product. So yes, the Europeans would have brought it as like a real mainstay of their textile production.
And I believe also they would use some of the, is it called tow? They'd use that with pitch.
Yeah, every single part. I can tell you, I can show you a little bit more about that. But yes, as you process the plant, you get higher quality fiber and sort of lower grade fiber, but every single part of it is useful, the most useful.
And so you could use that from making ships waterproof to also filling the holes in your house.
Exactly, right. So tow could be mixed with linseed oil or this pitch or something like that that's waterproof and used to caulk ships. That was called oakum. And for putting, helping to make the bungholes of barrels waterproof. It's very versatile.
That's amazing. So people were bringing the material to build a successful colony with them, as opposed to just assuming that they'd have everything they needed wherever they ended up trying to create a community.
Yes, exactly. So growing flax, and as well as hemp, which we're not going to talk about today, but growing flax and hemp were, as well as wool for textiles, all of those were important parts of textile production. And England, of course, had a very well-established wool industry. They were not eager to have the colonists develop their own wool industry, but we can maybe get into that a little bit later. But yes, flax was an important part of textile production for European colonists, for sure.
That's great. So, Margaret, we now come to the 1700s with Prince and Cate. So, as I understand it, Prince was enslaved in Lexington. Can you tell me about that part of his life?
Well, we know that he was born about 1738. He doesn't show up in the written records specifically named until his baptism in 1761. He was enslaved by Samuel Stone. Samuel Stone came into Lexington after his father died, who also named Samuel, interestingly enough. So he comes from out of town, if you will. Did he have Prince at the time? Not sure. Prince, an enslaved person, shows up on the record in 1745, which is the next year after Samuel Stone comes in. Prince would have been 7 years old at the time. Young children were typically not reported on tax rolls, so it's a little unclear if that person that he claimed was actually Prince. We do know, as they said, once he gets to the baptismal record, he's about 20 years old, and we know that's Prince.
So for all residents 16 and older, you're counted, whether you're enslaved or born free. 16 is a typical cutoff for knowing who's in the household. I believe that the Stone property, you told me, is somewhere on the Lincoln-Lexington border. Is that correct?
It's in that general direction. The original land grant was 600 acres, so it was a very large piece of property. The Stones were among the first families to come into Cambridge Farms.
So 1600s?
Yes. Gregory was the first landowner. By the time it gets down to Samuel, because there were three Samuels before Samuel, by the time it comes down to that, he has occupied part of the land, and the descendants of one of the sons, David, are in another place. This Samuel is basically around where Stone Meadow Golf Course is, which, if people thought that was just a fun name for a golf, no, it was Stone's meadow. So that's basically where Samuel Stone was living.
Right. And so you have this land that's from 600 acres has been split up, and generation comes down. We have the Samuel Stone household near that encompasses Stone Meadow. We have Prince there. He ends up becoming a free man in and around 1760, 63, 50s. Do you have a sense of when he becomes free?
Between 1761 and 1769, when he comes into the record via Reverend Clarke's diary. We only know that he was a free man before 1768. I don't know what happened to him prior to that. I can say definitively that he was free because Samuel Stone left a will, and he is not inventoried in the will. I don't know why he was freed. I don't know how long he had been free. But by 1769, which was basically the year Samuel Stone's will was promulgated, he was being hired by Reverend Jonas Clarke. At that time in the diary, Prince is listed as Prince Stone, which is interesting. So Prince did take the name Chester at some point, but at that point, at least according to what Reverend Clarke knew, that he was Samuel Stone. So, interesting. Excuse me, Prince Stone.
So Prince goes from having no last name, as many enslaved people did, to taking on the last name of his enslaver, which wasn't uncommon. And then at some point between being known as Prince Stone and the marriage and baptism, which we'll talk about later on, he has his own name that he has chosen instead.
Yes, and I'm not at all sure he actually chose the name Stone for himself. It's how people were known, typically. So it's something more, I believe, that Clarke named him. Prince shows up shortly thereafter in 1772 in a marriage with Kate Chester, and that's when he definitely shows up as Prince Chester. Mm-hmm.
So in the notes from Reverend Clarke, why is he in there? What is he paying Prince for a service?
Yes, he's paying Prince to prepare raw flax for the spinning wheel. In 1769, there was great fervor among the colonies. There were a lot of things called spinning bees, which produced a certain amount of flax. Somebody like Reverend Clarke, who was very much involved in the whole life of the town and the community, would have been interested in having somebody prepare flax so that he could have it ready for the weaver.
Who were the people in the colonies that prepared flax? Was this one of those cottage industries that people did? Were specialists, or how was that done?
Mm-hmm. So processing flax is a lot of work, and I'll be able to show a little demonstration in just a minute. But yeah, pretty much it's the kind of labor that could have been done in a household as unpaid labor. It's the kind of labor that could have been done by enslaved people as unpaid labor. It's also the kind of labor that could have been done by someone who specialized and could have gotten paid for it, just as we hear that Prince was paid to do that work. So it's such a kind of ubiquitous job for, especially in rural or farming communities, all different kinds of people could have been engaged in it.
And before you see the demonstrations, could you walk us through just the planting to the retting process?
Yes, okay. Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So in what we now call New England, flax is typically planted in April. It's one of the earliest crops that you can get in the ground as soon as the soil is workable. It's traditionally broadcast, which means just kind of spread out the same way you'd plant a wheat or another grain crop. And there were acres under cultivation at the time period that we're talking about today. Then it's about 90 days till the crop is ready to harvest, and it goes through a growth period. It typically gets about 3 feet tall, the most common flower color is blue, a beautiful shade of blue. It also comes in white and some other colors. And then after the sort of big flush of flowering, the plants will start to set seed. Then to harvest the crop, it's traditionally pulled up by the roots. And then that's when, and then it's dried. Then people would have certainly saved the seed, so remove the seed from the plants before the rest of the processing occurred. Then you do have to do a process called retting, which is a controlled rotting process. And we were just discussing, there were two kind of primary ways of doing this. You could do ground retting or dew retting, which produces a sort of grayish or brownish tone to the fiber, and that's if you want the technical details, there's a fungal process where the fungi colonize the plant and separate the different stalks of the plant so that the fiber can be released from the other parts of the plant stalk. Or you can do a process called water retting or pond retting, where you soak the stalks of the plant in a tank of water or a pond. Both of these were practiced in New England, and you can see you get a slightly different tone to the fiber once it's finished, but really the goal is the same. With water retting, it's bacteria that colonize the stalks of the plant, and in both cases, whether it's fungi or bacteria, you're really trying to get rid of the pectins, which are holding the layers of the stalk together to release the fiber, and this is kind of what you're going for, is the spinnable fiber.
So with Lexington in a community with a lot of wetlands at the time, and rivers, it probably would have gone with water retting since it was so available.
That's my hunch. I can't say for sure, but there are definitely retting ponds that are in the record in New England. That would be my guess. But obviously, maybe some historians can find out if there was a flax retting pond somewhere around here.
And that's one of the beautiful things about these conversations, is that there's subsets of specialties about colonial history that need more people to get engaged and to answer these questions so that we can uncover those answers, because it's not that we are finding new information, it's just that we're looking for it in the same sources in a different way.
Exactly, there is always more to know.
So do you want to show us what happens after you read?
Sure, I'd be happy to. All right. So the tool I'm standing by here is called a brake, a flax brake. It's used for smashing up the stalks of the fiber. And as I was describing earlier, I have two examples. This was water retted, so you see that lighter color on the stalks of the plant. And this was dew retted, and you see the sort of darker color here. And you can also get a sense of how tall the plant was at the time that it was harvested, and a little bit of the seed pods left over at the top of the stalk there.
Wow.
It's a pretty, so it's a multi-step job, and it's a lot of work. I'm just gonna take a portion of this bundle here. So the first step after retting is to use the brake to smash up the stalks. And can you hear that sound actually? That crunching sound is the sort of woody part of the plant material shattering and falling down onto the ground.
So there's no waste, so what happens to the stuff on the ground?
Right, so all of that stuff down there has many, many uses. It's flammable, so you can use it for fire starter, compostable, could be used for, people ask me if it was used for animal bedding. I'm honestly not sure about that. Okay, so we can start to see already here, just kind of speed things up a little bit here. But you can start to see the fibers are coming loose already from the plant. So I would keep sort of using the brake until the fibers start to come loose and all the woody material is smashed up here. I'll just kind of move us along here.
And so you're mentioning, I think that sometimes this would be used for bedding and for pillows as well as for, that would be the more coarser material be used for that, not the finer material? For bedding and pillows?
The stuff that's going to come off, the short pieces, that's called tow. That could be used for all kinds of purposes. I certainly could have been stuffing, or for making coarser quality textiles. You can also spin a pretty nice fiber, pretty nice yarn out of tow if you really clean it up nicely. But it was, I think, often saved for coarser textiles. All right, so I'm just going to do a little bit
That's amazing how
cleaning it up here. All right, so now instead of just a pile of sticks, we have clearly some fiber. The next step is called scutching or swingling. And these terms come from different cultures in Europe where the traditions were brought over to what's now New England. So I'm going to use a tool called a scutching knife or a scutching sword. They come in a lot of different shapes and styles. Just in the interest of our range of motion here, I'm going to use a shorter one. So the next step is to literally whack the, the preparation here and remove the rest of the what's called shives, the woody material. Any small pieces that break off at this point would also be considered tow. And you know, you could collect them up at the end. They'll be falling down to the ground below. And just keep working this until you've removed as much of the shives as possible.
So you were doing this quickly for the demonstration as someone who's getting paid, as Prince was. Would he go as quickly? Would he go slower for higher quality, or how would that work?
Right. So, you know, when you read the primary source materials, people so this whole process is referred to as dressing. Pounds a day, right? This probably weighs, I don't know, what you think, 2 ounces maybe?
Right, okay.
So they're doing a lot.
Okay.
They're cranking through pretty quickly. And certainly a skilled worker would get a better product in the end. So that would be the reason maybe you would pay someone to do it. But a lot of the quality also depends on how successful your retting process was. If it's under-retted or over-retted, you're going to run in, meaning the decomposition wasn't sufficient or it went too far, then you're going to run into a problem with the quality of your fiber.
So it's important along the entire process that you have good artisans along the way, because it all affects your final product.
Exactly. The more skillful the person, the better quality of a product you're going to get at the end of the process, and the less loss, less sort of tow or debris. Okay, so then the last step in this process, the dressing process, is called hetchling or hackling. Okay. And I'm going to step over to this side and just, so this tool has a cover because the tines are extremely sharp. They're very, very sharp metal tines that are embedded in a wooden board. And what we're going to be doing here is trying to separate the long and the short fibers. So I'm just going to gently draw the fibers across the tines. The short fibers, you can see, are getting pulled away. So this is tow. You could set that aside and save it. But what we're going for is what's known as line. And that's the sort of higher quality spinning fibers that would be spun to make the better quality textiles. So just keep going. Try not to stab yourself.
So you want to go quickly but safely.
Yep, exactly. So the one I'm using on this side is the tines are a little bit farther apart, a little bit larger. This would be considered a coarse hetchel or hackle. And then, just for the sake of timeliness here, I'm not going to spend too much longer on this one. But then, and you'd keep working from the ends toward the center till you've cleaned out all of the fiber. Then you can move to a finer hetchel where the tines are a little closer together and a little finer. and then continue to draw the fiber through the hetchels until, again, you've cleaned up all the way through the whole bundle. Then this finished preparation of fiber is ready for spinning. You would twist it up and set it aside. It's called a strick. And then the next step after this would be spinning.
So you weigh the strick, and that's what you get paid by. Was the weight of the strick itself, not the? It's a final product you get paid for?
Yes, and actually it's interesting. I think I don't know about Prince specifically and what the record says, but it could be the weight of the fiber, or sometimes it was a certain number of hours that people worked, or like a morning or part of a day, or depended on the terms of the contract.
And then these all look like relatively easy carpentry to make. Would the artisans make their own, or would they go to a store and buy this? How would that work?
Right. So I think again, there's a range. This kind of a tool would involve a blacksmith, most likely. So unless a person did have blacksmithing skills, I don't think they'd be making their own hetchels.
Okay.
Hetchel making is a subset of blacksmith's work. But some of these other tools are clearly, if you have basic woodworking skills or joinery skills, a brake and a sketching board, sketching knives isn't difficult. So I'm not sure that would have been a specialist job to make those.
So as a startup job, starting a new business, you could use your own handiwork until you get to here, and then you'd pay for that portion. So it's something that you could work your way into in terms of easy to buy your way in without being an apprentice, as opposed to being a blacksmith where you have to be apprentice in order to open up shop.
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think it's more considered like a general labor, general type of labor, not necessarily specialist. Although again, some people like Prince in this case were highly skilled enough that they would be paid for it, not just work on the farm kind of thing.
That's great. And then after this is done, there are processes we're going to discuss a little bit later, but could you just give us a overview of what happens after we make this?
So this is called line, or a strick of. So this isn't really finished all the way, but you already get a sense. It's some of the sheen is there for a nice quality fiber, and then the next step after this would be spinning.
This would be the more
which I think we're gonna be. Yes, exactly.
Right.
So this has been cleaned up pretty much as I could get it. There's a little.
So you did that work?
Yes. There's little bits of shives left in this that the spinner needs to sort of flick away and get rid of as they spin. But and then with toe cloth, sometimes the shives are actually left in the cloth all the way to the finished woven product. It could be very coarse, very scratchy. Read reports, especially lower quality materials being very uncomfortable to wear because they were very scratchy.
Okay, because I've seen reports about scratchy linen shirts being worn by young enslaved boys in the 1800s.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a famous reference in Booker T. Washington's autobiography about how wearing this type of linen fabric was so painful. He was indebted or very appreciative to a brother or sibling that would wear the fabric and sort of break it in for him before Booker T had to wear it. And so the coarser fiber, the coarser, harsher fabrics were, you see references in that was used as like clothing for enslaved people. Whereas, again, you can make a much finer, very soft, this is linen, for example. You can get beautiful, lustrous, fine fabric out of the same plant material.
So linen could be used for matting, for coarse fabric, or for finer fabric, and it's a matter of the time that's taken along the process to take out more of the impurities.
Yes, and also, sometimes the the fiber quality itself can vary. So, you know, people would have been sorting their coarser fiber from their finer fiber and then sort of putting it toward the use that they thought was most, you know, suitable.
And then for the colonists, especially the colonial military, they had a lot of wool and fiber in their clothing as well.
Certainly. In fact, there's, it's after the American Revolution, but I recently saw a reference to a certain amount of domestically produced linen that the Army bought compared to imported sort of European produced linen that the Army bought. But yeah, definitely woolen and linen fabrics, they're the kind of high performance fabrics of their day, you know.
And then how much of how many of these would you need to, say, knit your shirt?
That is a great question. So we can maybe there's some spun skeins over there, and we can, when we get to the talking about Cate and her work, we can talk about that a little bit. But you know, I don't know. I think you'd probably need maybe 15 or 20 like this to make a shirt or a garment that's useful. Yeah.
So it's specialized work, and you need a community to grow.
Definitely.
To grow the plants, to process the plants, and then to weave and make the fabric.
Yep, and then someone still has to sew that fabric into their shirt, and you know, many steps, lots of work.
They didn't discuss dyeing it, but yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that demonstration. That was wonderful. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
So that's the Prince side. He's done all that work. Let's talk a little bit about Cate. So
yes.
Can you tell me about how Cate ends up in her life before Lexington and her life in Lexington?
Cate was purchased for a box of butter as a 3-year-old child in Boston. She was brought home about 26 miles into the hinterlands, if you will, by her enslaver, Phineas Taylor. She grew up in this household, Dorothy and Phineas. They had what turned out to be 5 living children. She was in the same age group as the older children. Those children, the ones who survived, there were 2 girls who didn't survive for any length of time. They were boys, and they would be doing boys' work on the farm with the father, Phineas. Cate was the only girl child, enslaved, but the only girl child to be in that community or that family, and she worked with Dorothy, doing all of the things that a woman would do in the context of that. I want to emphasize that Cate was 3 when she was enslaved. This is horrific, but it was not uncommon in New England at all.
And so one of the things, you know, to reinforce that is that there are many ways that enslaved people got to New England. Sometimes it was direct from Africa. Sometimes it was at a way station like Cape Verde. Sometimes it was through an exchange of enslaved Native peoples and enslaved Africans in the Caribbean. And so it's all about how much profit you can make from these people in bondage, and it's hard to make money off of children. And so pre 8 years old, what do we do with you? And so you end up separating the children from their parents so the parents can focus on making money for their enslavers. So she ends up out in Stowe, and then comes to Lexington, and somehow she and Prince meet and decide to get married. And in the context of this time period, we now have the church saying we will perform the marriages of enslaved people, with the understanding that the 2 enslaved people will arrive at the ceremony, and their enslavers are there as witnesses, because the two adults don't have a relationship outside of their enslavement that they control. And the child or children of that relationship also is not reared by them as we think of parenting. Instead, they are just a potential source of income. And so you have this three parties. You have the husband, the wife, and the children, none of whom work as a family unit. And so they decide, we don't want that. We want to be two free people who get married. So how does that happen with Cate?
Well, it's really interesting. Cate was manumitted on the 7th of April of 1773. She and Prince were married on the 23rd of April. Prince was already a free man. There's every indication that that was her intention before actually even getting married. So she grew up on this farm. I believe she was pretty indispensable to the work of the family as she was growing up. She managed to secure her manumission just this short period of time before she was married. I think Cate was resourceful myself.
And I'd be remiss if not adding a little detail about how resourceful she was, is because they announce their engagement while she's still enslaved.
Exactly.
And then, so now she has a deadline in her head to get this manumission paper. And it's important, to think about we talked earlier about the ingenuity of people. Whether you're making fiber and string out of plants, or you are using the rules that you find yourself to make your life better. It's ingenuity. It's work. So they get married and they have two children in Lexington who are baptized by Reverend Clarke.
Yes.
So Reverend Clarke baptizes both children, marries Cate and Prince, and then I believe he also hires Cate. Is that correct?
Yes. As we said, he hired Prince in 1769. In 1773, he hired both of them 4 times in 1773. He hired Prince to do the breaking, just as we saw, and he hired Cate to do the spinning.
Right, and so that goes back to, you talked about earlier about the importance of having the quality from the retting to the processing, to the spinning, to the weaving, right? All of that matters to the final product.
Exactly.
So what do you take from the fact that he hires them together as a team?
It's a good question. I don't know the exact, haven't spent as much time with those primary sources as you have. But, it's because it's so many steps in the process, I feel like the spinning is, not that the work we were just talking about is not skilled work. Certainly Prince had, a high level of skill, agency, resourcefulness, all those important human qualities. But spinning is a quite highly skilled task. So the sort of length of fiber I prepared over there would have been wrapped around this kind of a tool called a distaff. And honestly, spinning was so much associated with women and women's work that the term distaff is sometimes used to refer to the women's side of a family. So in terms of the sort of gendered distribution of labor at the time, I think, not that men never spun or something like that, but I think it was, like you were saying, when Cate learned all the work that a girl or a woman in the household would have done, even as an enslaved child, that was work other women would have also potentially been doing in a rural community. So spinning very fine fiber. So here's some just examples of sort of, skeins of hand spun. This is tow that's been spun, so it's a little coarser and hairier. This is that really nice line. It's a little finer, and with some bleaching could make a really, really nice fabric. So just to say, Cate's a highly skilled. Prince may have been highly skilled, but Cate is definitely highly skilled.
Yes, and it's interesting that I think because they were more in the country, in the countryside, that Dorothy would have actually been a spinner teaching Cate, which when you get to a town like Lexington, although it wasn't big, it was a bustling town where more people would not have been doing this traditional craft. So the fact that Reverend Clarke was very interested in advancing the non-importation, he was very supportive of pushing back on these various acts that were being enacted from Great Britain. He was very interested in having his family wear linen. But they weren't going to be able to get the linen from the spinning bees because the quality of the yarn would have been much too coarse. It would have probably just broken apart. That was all for protest reasons. So the fact that Cate was employed to do this is an indication of how well she did her craft. In one of the notations, Cate was hired 4 times in 73, just as Prince was. And one of the notations in 1773 by Reverend Clarke that he had hired a Mr. Mason to do the weaving into the cloth. They're just juxtaposed, so you know that Cate was providing that fiber.
This goes back to that traditional work between the men and women at the time, where the spinning versus the weaving, in terms of the traveling, the itinerant worker like Mr. Mason would have been the weaver as the man, and the woman would have been doing the...
Yeah, it varied a little depending on the community. For example, I know in Deerfield there were, Elizabeth Amazon was a woman who was a weaver, so there were certainly women weavers as well as men who were weavers in New England. But yeah, I think a lot of the, just to your point, that like, if the minister was going for a higher quality of fabric, he would have employed someone with a higher level of skill.
Yes.
And so now we end up in 1775. In addition to the minister caring a lot about having his family wear linen, he also was urging the community to separate from the tyranny of Britain as he saw it. So, where are Prince and Cate and their 2 children in 1775? Do we have a record maybe from the census that tells us where they were?
Well, we have 2 kinds of records. We have tax records. Prince, we know, paid taxes in 73, 74, and 75. He was in Lexington at the time. We have baptismal records for their 2 oldest children, 1773 and 1774. So that's how we can locate this family at this time.
And so we have, a record that shows the poll tax, and he's paying other taxes in town. I believe that you mentioned that they were also paying non-property tax where they had land elsewhere?
All I know at this point is that he owned property in 1774. It's listed, it's a small amount of money, so that would not have been real property in Lexington. And Cate was able to negotiate a farm, small farm, in what is now Boxborough, from her previous enslaver, whose name was Phineas Taylor. Right. So I know that they had property in what is now Boxborough, and they paid property tax in Lexington, but it could not have been real property. That would have been personal property in Lexington.
Right. The family is there for April 19, 1775, and then they move further west, as many of the veterans from Lexington did as well over the next 10 to 20 years. Many of the folks who fought on April 19, who are from Lexington, end up going further west or north to New Hampshire or Vermont. they end up settling in what is now Boxborough.
That's right.
And could you tell me about how their property multiplies over the next generation?
Well, their daughter, Lucy, was the second child in the number of children, was able to acquire a farm on her own. So at one point, you see her father, her parents at this point, owning a farm, and then later on, of course, she would have been a child at that point, but later on, she herself owned a farm. And she had a considerable amount of property, not just real property. We have a will from her. She died in 1849, and the will is quite extensive. And it lists various things, amounts of money and property that went to various people, mostly her family. We also know from tax records in 1845 that there were 3 properties that were owned by the people in the Chester family. So these people were hardworking and they got property.
Thank you for helping us to learn more about Prince and Cate and their lovely life, and for the research you've done. Very much appreciated. And Michelle, thank you for bringing your expertise with showing us the ingenuity of people from thousands of years ago to now.
You're welcome.
So what would you like visitors to Massachusetts to know about the folks from Lexington, like the Chesters?
That it wasn't unusual for people to pass around children, basically for nothing. Somebody didn't want the expense of raising a child that young, given to somebody else who would increase his status by having a child like this. I would like them to know that when we get a fuller picture of how people conducted their lives, that they made the best of their circumstances. And in some cases, they were pretty successful. The Chester family, there is a Chester Road in Boxborough. Just saying.
And some of the Chester descendants you've brought to Lexington, correct?
Oh, yes, this has been very gratifying. I know a couple of present-day descendants, and one woman in particular has been the keeper of the family papers that are now in the Schlesinger Library.
And so that's what's great about this work, is that sometimes pack rats have treasures that are useful to those of us who want to learn more about how the world was, so we can make our world today better. So again, thank you both. I hope that you have been inspired by the lives of Cate and Prince Chester. These two understood the importance of creating a family without being under the tyranny of slavery. Their children benefited from their personal revolt against human bondage, and Cate and Prince's industrious nature benefited the Lexington community as its inhabitants mobilized in support of the non-importation movement. I invite you to learn more about the Black Patriots of Lexington and the other Black Patriots of the Revolutionary War. These men and women were heroes and founders of our great nation, the United States of America. Till next time, I'm Sean Osborne, and thank you to the curators and researchers who make this program possible.